I forgot my files. I mean, wouldn't it be great if there'd be some way, if you were at some remote location, to be magically transported back to the computer with just the files that I needed? Well, see, that's the idea behind telnet. What you need to remember is that a bazillion years ago, computers ran only at a command prompt. So telnet is a remote command prompt to a far, far away computer. Now, as technologies improve, and in later episodes, you're going to see things like remote desktop and things like that, which provide a complete graphical user interface. That's not what I'm talking about in this episode. We're talking about just being able to get to another computer's command prompt via the tool telnet. So, what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and get a telnet server and a telnet client going, and I'm going to use this one as a server, and we'll go ahead and bring another computer back as the client, and we'll start off by talking about telnet servers. Now, when it comes to telnet servers, there's almost nothing built into Windows, at least, that'll do it for us. So I'm actually going to be using a telnet server client called Free SSH. Don't worry, all will be revealed shortly. And then we're going to be using an incredibly popular telnet client called PuTTY on the other machine. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the telnet server. Now, over here on the server side, I'm going to be running a program called Free SSHD. This is a popular telnet server. It does a few more things which we'll see in a minute, but let's just concentrate on the telnet part. So the telnet server is currently running. Now, telnet needs user accounts, so I've created two user accounts, one called Dave and one called Mike. And these guys are ready for people to start logging into this guy and to start doing telnet connections. Now, one more thing I want to show you here. On this particular type of server, I can set it up to listen in on all my network cards, or if I just have one network card. But here's the important thing. Telnet runs on port 23. So, the telnet server is running. So what we need to do now is head over to the client. And there's a bazillion telnet clients out there. In fact, Windows comes with telnet clients, but I want to show you the big kahuna of them all, PuTTY. Okay, so here I am at the client. So if I want to access a telnet server, I need to be able to run a telnet client. Now, most operating systems come with a telnet client, but it runs at a command prompt and they're ugly. So what pretty much everybody likes to use is a very popular piece of freeware called PuTTY. PuTTY is, well, it's a client of all kinds of different things. Let's start with telnet. And I can use this as a tool to connect to a telnet server. So notice that I had to actually select telnet here on port 23. And I just type in the IP address. And you can see it says login, so I've hit a telnet server. So I'll type in the username and password. And I'm connected. So the important thing I want you to appreciate as you look at this is that you are looking at the command prompt, not of this computer that I'm on, but of a remote computer. Now, also you'll notice I'm actually in the root directory of that remote computer. We would normally set up a telnet server to not give access to these particular folders, but do appreciate you can do that. So that's telnet. The cool thing about telnet is that it was the original remote connectivity tool. Telnet is arguably the oldest application there is on the internet. Some people say email, I say telnet, it gets fuzzy back then. The important thing to appreciate is that you don't transfer files with telnet, you don't see anything graphical, it just gets you to a command prompt. You remember, you can do a lot at a command prompt. There's one big downside to telnet, and that is everything's in the clear. So let's go ahead and fire up Wireshark again, and this time I'm going to be running the client over here and the server over here, and let's get a nice Wireshark capture, and let's just see how in the clear all this is. So I'm over on the server right now, and I've got my telnet server running, and what I'm going to do now, you're going to see all kinds of other junk, I'm going over to the client, and I'm going to start a telnet session. It's all typed in and ready to go. So I'm going to type in the username Dave, password of total. I'm even going to do a quick dir, and then I'm just going to exit out. It's there. So I've opened and closed a telnet session really, really quickly. So let's stop this capture, and let's see what's happened, and certainly we can tell from the server side what's taken place. I got a lot of stuff in here. There's clearly some telnet, so let me use the filtering feature of Wireshark. So here's all kinds of telnet information that's gone on. As if we pick any one particular packet here, you can see we're using port 23, everything's working great. Now, the interesting part to all this is if we follow the TCP stream, and what I want you to see is right up here at the top. The login is DDAAVVEE. What you're looking at here, the reason it's repeated like this is because telnet actually emulates a terminal. So back in the old days, a terminal would send one character back to wherever was asking for the connection, and another character would show up on the screen. And that's why you'd always see this double stuff. But there's the password, clear as day. Here's all kinds of information we don't want to give away about our system. All these little values here are what are known as ANSI codes for colors and things like that. So if you take your time and look, it's a little messy, but you can actually see that someone typed dir, and that's exactly what I did. So you can see the dir command is up there, everything's in the clear. So that's the downside to telnet. And we still use telnet a lot, but it's usually where we make a direct connection to a switch or a router or something like that. We don't like to use telnet over the internet itself because everything's in the clear and it's risky. What we do instead is we use something called SSH. SSH is an encrypted version of telnet. SSH actually does a lot more than just acts as an encrypted version of telnet. But let's go ahead and start with just that part. So to appreciate SSH, let's head back to the server. Okay, so here we are back at free SSH. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the telnet server and I'm going to start the SSH server. SSH stands for Secure Shell, and it pretty much looks identical to telnet except everything is encrypted. So we've got it up and running. You can take a look at SSH. Notice that SSH runs on port 22 and it's listening on all interfaces here as well. On this particular tool, it will use the same users that we created for telnet. Okay, so I got SSH up and running. So let's go back to PuTTY. We're going to run PuTTY again, except you're going to notice a few differences compared to what we saw with telnet. Okay, so back at the client, I'm going to fire up PuTTY. Now this time I'm going to run on SSH. SSH uses port 22. So once again, we just type in the IP address. Now, here's the one big difference that you're going to see between SSH and telnet. What's happening here is he's trying to generate an encryption key. So the server is sending us, the client, a key that we will use to encrypt everything. And he's saying, do you trust this guy? Of course I trust him, he's great. Okay, so we just hit all right. So it's the key that really makes a big difference between SSH and telnet. That key is used by SSH to encrypt all the traffic. So if we fired up Wireshark and actually looked at everything, it's all just gobbledygook. It's not very exciting to look at. So with SSH you're encrypted. With telnet, at least you have a username and password. That's good, because there is one more I want to mention. There's this oldie goldie called rlogin. It used TCP port 513. Rlogin is scary because there wasn't even a username and password. If you had an rlogin server running and you had an rlogin client, you just connected. There was no anything. You just were on. So rlogin is like not used by anybody ever, but it is mentioned on the Network Plus. We still do use telnet, but it's usually just really local trust kind of stuff. For example, a lot of people like to connect to their routers via telnet. And then if we really want to do long distance stuff, like for example, if I want to connect to my router from across the universe or something like that, we tend to use SSH simply because of the encryption.